Okay, so we're going to look at scoring a good top mark on the 32 mark question for the AQA French GCSE writing paper at higher tier. This is the most difficult question you'll face on the writing paper, and you'll get a choice of two, much the same as with question 1, the 90-word question. This is the 150-word question and is always question 2. And is the question that you should spend most of your time on. 32 marks, twice as many as for the 90-word question. And the common mistake to make is to like the 90-word question more, and so to spend more energy, more time on that one, and not spend as much time on the one that is worth twice as many marks. There are only 2 bullet points, but you do get a choice of question. It's not quite as drastic with the mark scheme if you do miss a bullet point out, but obviously you can only score the top marks if you do mention both bullet points. So it's important to choose a question where you're fairly confident that you understand the bullet points, and sometimes there are quite specific things in the bullet points that you need to mention. This one on holidays then is a fairly straightforward one from the specimen paper, and we've got 2 bullet points: the importance of holidays and memorable holidays. And it's important to notice the word memorable often comes up, the word special often comes up. It doesn't actually matter if your holiday isn't particularly memorable or particularly special, if the word was spécial, but you can always throw that word into your answer just to make sure it looks like you're ticking that box. But if you write a pretty generic holiday in the past, you'll be credited just the same. It doesn't have to be particularly amazing in terms of what that holiday consists of. The idea there is just to remind you that they really want a past tense in there. Okay, so if we look at the mark scheme, first of all, there's not as much to go on in terms of hitting the mark scheme as there is perhaps with the 90-word question, but the real thing that we've got to notice here is that the opinions, plural opinions, are expressed and justified. So you've got to give reasons for your opinions. So at least 2 opinions with a justification, opinion with a reason, which I often refer to as OJs. And you'll notice that's also here in the 10 to 12 bracket as well, which means that if you don't have 2 justified opinions, you can only get 9 out of 15 for language, for content, for content, that one, the biggest section of the marks. So you're cutting 6 marks off straight away if you don't have 2 justified opinions. With this question, that is the one biggest thing you've got to remember to include. It's not so strict on getting in all 3 tenses. You can get a top mark answer if you just stick to indeed there's nothing in the mark scheme that says you've got to go beyond 1 tense. You probably are going to use 2 tenses, particularly in this question where it's asking for a memorable holiday. It'd be quite difficult to do that in the present tense, but there we go. So the other thing is that it wants to be clear, communication clear, and it wants to be detailed and obviously fully relevant. And this is often the mistake that people make as well. They don't make their responses fully relevant. So if you just write an essay on holidays that maybe you've learnt for an answer for a speaking test question, or a previous essay you've practiced in class, and it's vaguely related to holidays, that's not going to be fully relevant. So it must address the bullet points, everything you write, really. Okay, so opinions and justifications, that's the first thing to notice. And then if we go down in the mark scheme so just to mention then, if you don't manage if you don't make if you don't cover both bullet points, then what that means is you can't get the top band. So you can still get 12 out of 15 for content by only mentioning one bullet point, in theory. It's not quite as harsh as with the 90-word question. It's more important that there are opinions that are justified. So I'd always go for at least 3 in case one goes wrong. Then we've got a score out of 12 for language. And as you would expect here, it's talking about variety of vocabulary and structures, complex sentences. So the thing with this question is this is where you throw all your complex language at. There's only so much required for the 90-word question in terms of complexity, but here the sky's the limit really. The more you can get in, the better. In fact, I'd be thinking about trying to show something off grammatically fancy or vocabulary, higher level vocab in every single sentence you write to get that top bracket, because 150 words isn't that much if you really get into the detail. And then finally there's a mark for accuracy, and pretty obviously we need to make as few errors as possible, although it does say they're meant for full marks. There may be few errors, a few errors particularly in the complex stuff, but it does say verbs and tense formations are secure. So you can have mistakes, but obviously not too many. Okay, so the first thing I'd do with this is I'd plan it. I'd spend I'd try and spend 50 minutes on this really, if I could, or as close to 50 minutes as possible. Remember, you've got an hour and a quarter for the writing exam at higher tier, and I'd want to get that 90-word question done at least in 20 minutes, but nearer 15 if I could. And give myself 5 or 10 minutes for the higher tier translation, maybe 10 minutes. So, then I'd have hopefully at least 40 minutes, but hopefully nearer 50 minutes for the big one. The translation might be difficult, but there's not a huge amount you can do. You either know it or you don't. So you're better off spending your time on the 150-word question, doing what you can on the translation, maybe even do that one first, and get it out of the way so that you can run into the clock on this 150-word question. Or alternatively, you might want to get this big one out of the way first. Play around with exam technique and strategy. You don't have to do the questions in order. So my plan would look something like this. I'd want to write the bullet points down. Maybe I'd put them in English to remind myself, although fairly straightforward what those mean. I'm going to write OJ on my plan as well, just to remind myself, and I might tally them off as I write them, because it's easy to get into it and forget about the OJs, and then you can end up writing a really good piece of French that doesn't score particularly highly because it only gets 9 out of 15 for content because of the lack of OJs. Make sure those OJs are clear as well. Don't take any risks with language you're not too sure about. So then what I'd jot down my ideas, my vocab, for what I could cover in each of those bullet points. I might find that actually writing about a memorable holiday, basically a holiday in the past, I could write 150 words just on that. So it might be that my importance of holidays, I might struggle with a little bit more, not have a huge amount to say, or not have a huge amount that I'm sure is right, and that I have the French for. I might be able to think of reasons why holidays are important, but can I put them into French? I don't want to be taking too many risks. So if my paragraphs aren't balanced, that really doesn't matter. I can write 120 words on this bullet point and 30 words on this bullet point, and still access top marks. It doesn't have to be balanced at all. So initial ideas then, I've got spend time with your family. I've got avoiding stress from daily life. That's a nice higher level word. Quotidienne, for example, at school, or I could refer to work and parents going to work. And then I could talk about how you get to discover other cultures, other foods, other languages. Might be a good idea to put a positive spin on learning languages. Remember, a French teacher is going to be marking this, so you're not going to lose bonus points. You're not going to turn the examiner off you if you say how great language learning is. Always good to look for opportunities to say French is great, France is wonderful, and language teachers are amazing. Don't make it super obvious, perhaps, but if you can put a positive spin on language learning, that's never going to do you any disservice. Excuse me. And then I've got some ideas for holidays in the past. So Italy's a good one because I could talk about. There's plenty that you can do in Italy. It's got the beach, so yes, fairly straightforward. I could play football or tennis. I could build sandcastles. That's perhaps a bit higher level vocab, and then I'd remind myself of the word for sunbathing because that's quite tricky being reflexive. Se faire bronzer. I could eat ice cream, or I could talk about food. And I'm starting to think, well, how could this be memorable? Be good if it was memorable. Maybe it was not good. Maybe there was something wrong at the restaurant. And of course, Italy's got plenty of museums, lots of history. Maybe I'm good at history. Maybe I could link it to me being successful at school in the future and bring a future tense in and link that to a different tense that way. But then I might think, well, I've never actually been to Italy, so am I going to struggle with the content, making it believable? How am I going to add detail to museums if I've never been to Rome? It's good if I can link it to the truth, but sometimes linking it to the truth leads you down the road of wanting to say things that happened, but you don't have the French for. So sometimes it's better to stay generic and say things that didn't actually happen, but then you've got the risk that it can be too general and too boring, really. So you've got to hit the middle ground quite carefully there. With yes, you want it to be believable and you want it to be a bit exciting, which the truth can bring, but then sometimes the truth can bring problems where you don't know how to say stuff, or you don't you get into too complicated French. I could have it memorable because something went wrong, so I could maybe somebody could lose a purse. Maybe I know the verb to steal. Maybe the police could be involved. Maybe I could have it found again, and a happy ending. Maybe I could tell some sort of story with that. So those are my initial ideas of how I could what I could include, and the pitfalls and the possibilities of each of those. I'm probably not going to go for all of those in one answer because that's quite a lot there. But if I did start writing and found myself running out of ideas, could be quite useful to have in a plan some more ideas that I could go to, and I could turn my story a little bit if I'm running out of ideas and I've still got plenty of words to go or something's not working. So it's always good to have a think before you start writing. Jot down, even if it's jotting down ideas in English, of different points that you could make, even if you don't make them all in the real thing. It's a good idea to have things to refer back to. Okay, so I'll write this piece then in the second part of this video. Do come back and watch part 2 so you can see how I end up putting it together.